Ignition sequence starts.
Good morning and welcome to Mission Control Houston. You're looking at the International Space Station Flight Control Room and the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers as they monitor the systems on the space station and work with the Expedition 60 crew members in the last few hours of a busy work week. On top of a routine dose of science operations in the station's laboratories, the crew members also spent time on visiting vehicle operations. That is, the departure of a Dragon cargo ship and the arrival of a Soyuz spacecraft with no one on board.
Welcome to Space to Ground. I'm Kayla LaFrance. This week, there's been a lot of traffic coming and going around the International Space Station. Late Monday, an uncrewed Soyuz MS-14 spacecraft successfully docked to the station on its second attempt. The unpiloted Soyuz launched last Wednesday, August 24th, from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, and originally rendezvoused with the station on Saturday for an autonomous docking. This first attempt was aborted after a problem was discovered in the rendezvous equipment at its originally planned docking port. For its second attempt, the uncrewed Soyuz spacecraft successfully docked to the aft port of the Zvezda service module, bringing with it 1,450 pounds of cargo and an experimental 350-pound humanoid robot known as the Skybot F-850. This week also brought a farewell to the SpaceX 18 Dragon. After a 33-day mission to the International Space Station, the Dragon capsule was released from the Canadarm2 to begin a 6-hour trip back home. Splashing down in the Pacific Ocean, the Dragon 18 capsule returned nearly 2,700 pounds of hardware and science experiments, completing this particular capsule's third mission to the station. On Monday, NASA astronaut Christina Koch reached the halfway point of her 328-day mission. Koch arrived to the station in a Soyuz spacecraft 164 days ago, on March 14th. Since arriving, she's been busy performing science experiments, in-flight maintenance, cargo ops, and much more. The 164 days left in her mission will add up to become the longest duration single flight for a woman. Koch celebrated this midpoint with a video celebration of Women's Equality Day and the female space pioneers who paved the way for her record-setting mission.
I have truly been inspired by the struggle and triumph of so many women who dared to break new ground in all aspects of society. I even have the honor of being among those who are paving the way for the first women to set foot on the moon during NASA's Artemis program. And I hope to inspire not only her, but the first women who will set foot on Mars.
Keep sending in your questions using the hashtag AskNASA. We'll see you next week.
As Kayla mentioned, flight engineer Christina Koch is now halfway through a nearly 11-month-long mission that'll keep her on board the International Space Station until February of 2020. Koch earned many of the usual credentials needed to be selected as an astronaut, but they don't tell her whole story. Here's a look at her favorite extreme adventures, her dabbling with lightning, and a foreign trip that changed her perspective on life.
One thing I love is outdoor activities. I love rock climbing, surfing, camping, backpacking, anything that's a challenge that puts me in kind of a circumstance that I have to think hard to get out of or just enjoy the outdoors. So those are some of my favorite things. My favorite vacation ever is camping trips with my little sister. She's about 20 years younger than me, and we like to go out on adventures in the West, everywhere from Montana to Utah, and everywhere in between, and we just have a ball. One thing people are surprised to hear about me is that I have actually ridden a motorcycle solo across the country. The trip was from North Carolina to Montana, and I camped along the way by myself, and it was a phenomenal trip. I learned a lot about self-reliance, planning, and also just enjoyed every minute of kind of seeing the country go by. When I was in college, I was majoring in physics, and I took it upon myself to build a lightning machine, which is also known as a Tesla coil. It's a device that was invented by Nikola Tesla, and it produces actual lightning strikes that are fairly long. And I remember it was a summer project for me, and I invited a bunch of my friends over in college to check it out, and they were all completely baffled at, one, how I did it, why I chose to do it. But at the same time, I think they knew that it was near and dear to my heart. I'm kind of a geek at heart. I studied abroad in Ghana, which is in West Africa, and that trip was one of the most profound experiences of my life. It taught me the perspective that not everything that I had come to know so far in life was the same the world round, and that my experiences and my way of seeing the world was just one of many ways. And I learned about an entirely different culture and came to love it.
Christina Koch and her crewmates serve as the laboratory assistants for researchers on Earth who are looking into a wide range of scientific concepts. And that includes some topics we have to master in order to continue exploring beyond low Earth orbit, starting with our return of American astronauts to the Moon by 2024 as part of the Artemis program. For example, it'll be critical to understand how to interact with regolith, the fine particles of dust that cover the Moon's surface. And we're using the new Hermes facility on the International Space Station to study how regolith particles move in microgravity over a long period of time.
If you look at asteroids or if you look at the moon, you'll see this layer of regolith covering the surface. So it's this fine particles, fine dust that covers the entire surface. So what's happening is the solar system is very dynamic, and we have asteroids and meteoroids moving around and impacting different bodies. So the surface is getting bombarded all the time. So you have this fine layer of fragments on the surface. So why would we want to study it, right? And why would we want to study it on the space station? There's a lot of interest in one day sending astronauts to asteroids, for instance, and we have already sent a lot of robotic missions to asteroids and plan to send more. And so every time we visit these asteroids, we learn more and more. And there's very diverse bodies of asteroids. Every asteroid seems to be different. And so we would need to understand how to interact with the asteroid surface. So if you're going to anchor to the surface of the asteroid, for instance, you need to understand how to interact with the regolith. So asteroids are pretty small bodies, and so they have actually microgravity levels of gravity. And so this is actually what you find on the space station as well. There's 4 experiments, and each one is a tube. So it's a clear polycarbonate tube about the size of a Pringles can. And so inside this tube, we have the asteroid simulants. And so this is what we're actually studying. And so the main piece of data that we're getting is the movement of these particles. So we have a camera looking at each of these tubes. Over the course of about a year, that cassette 1 will be up there, we'll get this basically time-lapse imagery of the particles moving. And so we're looking at the long-term effects of microgravity and what's happening to the movement of the particles. Also, something that we have on asteroids is vacuum, right? So we want to expose our experiments to the vacuum of space. So we actually have our facility hooked up essentially to a port to space. We did cassette 1, but the idea is that Hermes will be open to other investigators. So cassette 2, cassette 3, cassette 7, these will be other researchers that will apply to use Hermes to do research on asteroid regolith and granular material investigations. And we think that ISS is a wonderful place to study asteroid regolith, to study lunar regolith, regolith in general. So we're excited about the opportunities that Hermes will bring for researchers in the future.
The NASA-led effort to return astronauts to the Moon in a sustainable fashion is moving ahead all across the country. Here's an update on the progress of work being done on the Space Launch System rocket, the Orion spacecraft, and the Exploration Ground Systems hardware that will support those missions coming up in just a few years. One area of research being conducted on board the International Space Station is science that teaches us how to make those future long-duration missions safe and successful journeys for the human explorers. And that comes from learning how the human body reacts during prolonged exposure to the space environment. We're also looking into how we can provide the supplies that explorers will need on missions to deep space that'll last for years. Supplies such as fresh food.
Space gardening. Presented by Science at NASA. Roman statesman Marcus Tullius Cicero said, "If you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need." Humans attempting someday to make Mars their home may well share the sentiments expressed by the orator from ancient Rome. As for the library, books can now be stored digitally. But how does your garden grow in space? To find out, scientists have been studying plant growth on the International Space Station, or ISS. The results could help boost the productivity of both extraterrestrial and earthly gardens. Recently, the ISS has been home to some impressive harvests, yielding tasty snacks for crew members. However, scientists aren't through trying to unlock the secrets of how plants grow away from home. Future space outpost dwellers will need to grow plants for food and for recycling air and water, says Annalisa Paul of the University of Florida. So we're studying how plants adapt to the spaceflight environment. Our findings will also help us understand how plants might respond to new and challenging environments here on Earth. Paul and her colleague Robert Furl have been growing plants in space since 1999, when they launched their first experiment on Space Shuttle Columbia. Several space station experiments followed. One of their most compelling discoveries was that certain root growth strategies assumed to require gravity really don't. Plant roots seek water and nutrients by growing away from where they're planted. To determine which direction to grow, terrestrial plants use gravity as a cue, and they use touch to maneuver around obstacles. In the late 1800s, Charles Darwin demonstrated that plants growing along a tilted surface don't send their roots directly away from the seed, but instead send them to the right or left. He hypothesized that this growing pattern, called skewing, was caused by a combination of the roots touching their way across the slanted surface and gravity pulling straight down on them. In an experiment in 2010, Paul and Furl discovered, however, that roots of plants growing in microgravity on the station skewed like their earthly counterparts. The ISS showed us something we never would have known otherwise, notes Paul. Gravity isn't essential in root orientation. Good news. That's one less impediment to growing plants in space. Plants will efficiently seek the nutrients they need without gravity as a cue. The experiment also studied the patterns of genetic expression. Space plants changed the way they expressed their genes in order to produce specific proteins helpful in zero gravity. Paul explains, when living organisms are faced with environmental change, their response almost always involves a change in genetic expression. To cope, they switch on and off certain genes. Plants are pros at this. Paul says, plants' cell walls undergo a kind of remodeling in space. The genes associated with a cell wall are often in the opposite switch positions than they're in on Earth. The researchers aren't yet sure what purpose this serves, but they intend to find out with additional experiments. Paul and Furl aren't alone. Many other scientists have also been studying plant growth on the space station to unlock the secrets of successfully growing plants in this novel environment. At the heart of all the research is the quest to provide humans with everything they need, wherever they may be. For more about gardening in space, visit www.nasa.gov/station. For more on the growth of science both on and off our home planet, visit science.nasa.gov.
The laboratories on the International Space Station provide a setting for scientists to do experiments that take the force of gravity out of the equation. That is to say, experiments that they can't do on Earth. For example, there's an experiment that's studying sediments of quartz and clay and focusing on the forces between particles that cluster together. The International Space Station is home to some equipment that could help answer some big questions in modern physics. The Cold Atom Lab produces clouds of atoms that are 10 billion times colder than deep space. And thanks to the microgravity environment on the space station, we can observe those atoms for much longer than we can on Earth. We've shown you a couple of experiments taking place on the International Space Station. Let's take a look at one up close. Last year, flight engineer Serena Aunen-Chancellor turned on a camera while she was working with the ANGI-X cancer therapy experiment and let us watch as she grew and examined certain cells. This is an effort to find out if cells grown in space can improve testing methods on the ground for certain cancer therapy medications.
Hey, good morning and welcome to ISS. Today I am working on the ANGI-X cancer trials up here on ISS. We've actually spent quite a bit of time working on this. And what we're looking at here is something called an endothelial cell. And an endothelial cell, you find these cells in every blood vessel in your body. And so people wonder why we're growing these cells up on ISS. And scientists believe that cells in the body grow very similar up here on ISS. A lot of times scientists try and grow these endothelial cells on the ground and they don't live for very long. And they think for some reason they grow better up here in space. And that's one of the things we're testing on orbit here. And you can see some of these cells right here on the computer. So why is this important? Well, endothelial cells help form blood supply. And tumors need blood supply to get bigger and bigger. And all of us have had someone impacted by cancer, whether it's a family member or a friend. And so we're always thinking, how can we fight this cancer? Well, one thing we're looking at is, can we grow these cells on orbit to test new cancer drugs to prevent that blood supply from growing? And if we can stop that tumor blood supply from growing, then we can help beat that cancer. So that's just one of the science experiments we're looking at here on the space station. This is where all the cells live in their biocell habitat. And when we're done working with them, we put them in something called Sable 2, which is up in the ceiling for ISS. And it feels all nice and warm and comfortable, because it is, because it's just like the temperature of the human body. And so we let the cells live and grow there, and we've had them for almost 2 months now up here on ISS. We feed them, we give them nutrients, and they basically live. They're like miniature crew members living with us. So we're going to this new biocell, which is Delta 7. And these biocells here have been treated with varying levels of a cancer chemotherapy drug that is being tested out here on ISS. And so we are looking at the cells, the researchers look at the images that I take for them on the microscope to see how well that drug is impacting the connection between those endothelial cells, to see if it will stop this tumor blood supply from growing. Make sure that's level.
Same position for Forrest and spaceflight are at the leftmost position for the first image.
Yeah, you can see some of these tubule formations here also.
Good spot.
Yeah, I agree, it's a good spot. You do see definitely some of the tubule formations here and some of the gaps in between the cells.
Really good representation of both of those. That's a really good spot.
The International Space Station provides a working laboratory for astronauts in the microgravity environment. Solar energy is a key element in keeping those laboratories running. Astronauts rely on this renewable energy source to power the machines they need for their science work, as well as the ones they need for their survival. In this demonstration video, astronaut Ricky Arnold explains the process of generating power from the station's solar arrays to produce electricity for astronauts as they orbit 250 miles above the Earth's surface.
Hi, welcome aboard the International Space Station. I'm astronaut Ricky Arnold, and I'm currently at one of our human research facilities on ISS, where you can see centrifuges, laptops, and other scientific equipment. Across from me is another one of these experiment racks, where you can see ultrasound imaging, more laptops, cameras, other equipment, all stuff that requires electrical power. In fact, we have so much equipment for science and life support that our electrical system has about 8 miles or 13 kilometers of wiring to make it all work. So where does this energy come from? Let's have a look. From here in the cupola and through other windows, you can easily see the solar arrays soaking in the sunlight. They are massive. These 4 solar arrays are made of solar cells, which are purified chunks of the element silicon. Together, the solar arrays contain a total of 262,400 solar cells and cover an area of about 27,000 square feet, more than half the area of a football field. That's huge. When the station is in sunlight, the solar arrays produce about 60% more power than we actually need during the daytime. That extra power goes directly to charging our lithium-ion batteries. Now, those batteries are essential because they provide the power we need during the 16 night times we have per day here on the space station. The energy our solar arrays can produce is enough to power 40 homes, and we can maximize the power we generate by rotating the arrays in 2 axes, one like a windmill to track the sun through the course of the day, the other to track the sun's inclination, or its angle in the sky. The space station's electrical power system uses direct current to provide energy for our laptops, lights, water recovery system, and science experiments. Thanks for coming aboard today. Now back to Earth.
If you'd like to get another look at that story or any of the ones that we had for you today, check us out on YouTube and on Facebook. There are the addresses. While you're there, look around, because you will find lots of other cool stuff, too, about NASA and America's human spaceflight program. And while you're out there on the internet, check out Houston We Have a Podcast. That's folks here at NASA talking about their work in all aspects of space exploration. We post new episodes every Friday. Today, Gary Jordan talks with philosopher and author Frank White about the overview effect, how astronauts who get a chance to view our planet from far above it come away thinking differently about their home planet. Go to nasa.gov/podcasts for today's episode. Actually, all of our previous episodes are there too, as well as the full library of all of the NASA podcasts, all of which you can also listen to on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud. This is Mission Control Houston.